Hi everyone, my name is Gifty Amadia Arthur, and I will be doing my presentation on bicycle collisions in Philadelphia County as my topic for our PA accidents individual presentation and report. Okay, so my motivation, why focus on bicycle incidents? I consider myself to be an outdoor person. I love activities that involve going outdoors. I'm a big soccer fan and soccer player as well. So that's my preferred way of working out. However, ever since I came to this country and I experienced winter, I noticed that my activity is greatly stalled during the winter season. So I have found a way to compensate for my exercising by taking long walks, actually. So I have been religiously going on long walks, especially this year. And one thing I also saw was that it gets really dark quickly during the winter. So there was a time I wanted to get a reflective clothing on. I went to a store nearby, O'Reilly's specifically, and unfortunately, they did not have a neon jacket. So I went to Amazon and purchased one of these reflective safety vests. I attached a link to this presentation, and this is how it looked actually. And quick disclaimer, this wasn't the store I purchased it from, but this was how, generally the idea when I went to Amazon and made the purchase. So unfortunately, the one that came in for me was not as reflective as showed here in the picture, so I had to return them. And that stalled my, walking activities. I vowed to myself not to take walks at night until those reflective vests came in. So when we had this project to analyze the PA accidents, and as I was looking at the data set, I looked at all the tables and I found an attribute that was talking about the clothing type. And I said, no one would think about what a motorist was wearing if it happens to be a car crash. Nobody will ask what were they wearing as the first thing. However, if it's a bicycle incident or a motorcycle incident, what they were wearing would probably tell us a lot and inform as to us as to why the incident occurred. So, tying, my recent purchase to that information, I thought, why not? Let's look at bicycle incidents. So, for this presentation, I will be doing a data overview and then talk about cycling safety initiatives out there. I'll also do a visual analysis and help share the insights that I gleaned from the data. And I thought of what I could add as a piece of information to what I was getting. And I decided to look at the bike laws for the Pennsylvania state specifically, and then what are some of the insurance and compensations for individuals involved in bicycle accidents. And then I'll end the presentation by offering recommendations for safer cycling. So to begin with, we all went to this. I'm sure we're all familiar with this website by now. This was where I got my data set, and I focus specifically on the Philadelphia County. It's on the bottom right corner over there, as I've highlighted. It looks like a much smaller state compared to the other ones, say Allegheny County. But I kid you not, the number of people in Philadelphia is more than Allegheny County. So I could, speculate or perhaps assume that the cycling activity that goes on is definitely more. So yeah, that kind of still encouraged me to look at Philadelphia, and I focused my data set for the year 2022. So the data set was downloaded in CSV format, and I uploaded them into Power BI. So for the tables, my focus was the person, the crash, flag, and the cycle tables. I merged the three of them, person, crash, and flag, into a much bigger table called accidents, and picked a few of the attributes that I thought together described a typical bicycle incident. The cycle table was kind of unique because I realized it was created specifically for motorcycles. However, for the type of vehicles that were being recorded, there was one that was indicated as pedal cycle, and those ones were neither motorcycles nor bicycles. And from what I could tell, those were more like the modern bicycles that we have today that have a motor attached, which kind of helps generate movement. So those were considered pedal cycles, and I felt they contained some kind of information that was very relevant. So I also created another table called cycle specific for it to help us gain a lot more insights. And we'll be seeing that later on in this presentation. So I go to my visuals and analysis again for Philadelphia County for the year 2022. And my first is the demographic analysis. What's going on here with respect to cyclists and their gender. So from the dashboard or this snapshot alone, I could tell you a few things that are going on here. So overall, there were 794 bicycle incidents recorded, at least from the tables that I merged. This is a small number compared to the 44,000 that first showed up when the rows were merged. But when I filtered them by bicycle, it reduced to 794. But that's a significant number when you correlate it with the usual bicycle activity that happens on roadways. So that's a relevant number over there. The number of people involved in those bicycle accidents is quite higher, 1,838. 12 people died from these incidents, unfortunately, and 48 people sustained serious injuries. When we look at the gender distribution, we see a lot more participation from the male gender compared to females. And there's this group that's, uncategorized or undefined, but they still had relevant information, which is why I still kept them in the data set. When I focus on the age groups, we see a very nice distribution here across the age groups. We can say that most of the participation were coming from the 40s and 50s and then the 30s group. So the middle age category, they were the ones that participated the most. But we cannot leave out our 60s and 70s, which is quite impressive. So to me, I would say pretty much everybody is a big fan of cycling. Hence, I found this, undertaking very useful. When I look at the seriousness of injuries across the age groups, I could tell that the 30s and 20s were sustaining more injuries. I think perhaps they do take on bike trails and tasks that are a lot more challenging, so hence their injuries. But so it goes like that across the spectrum, and I thought it was quite impressive to see that there was no injury whatsoever for the 60s and 70 groups. So that was a very nice finding. And my next analysis was the main causes. What's happening with these bicycle incidents? What's causing them to happen? So when we take a look at the pie charts, we see here, at least from a glance, that these incidents are not occurring because of speeding or being distracted. I mean, they do happen, but that's not majority of the case. So, I mean, from that alone, it tells me that perhaps they are not occurring on the roadways, just from that insight. I added a stop control indicator over there to say that that's where a lot of bicycle incidents occur. And I think it makes sense because when a cyclist is riding and they get to a stop sign, a lot of car drivers will not think of giving the bicycle the right of way. I think it's just not popular. So we do get a lot of incidents happening over there with the stop control destinations. And Majority of these incidents do not require people to be transported to the hospital, which is fine, meaning that there are injuries that could be treated either using first aid or just at home. And most of these incidents are also occurring during dry seasons compared to wet seasons. So when I look at the type of collision that occurs in these accidents, about 80% just from the visual occurs as an angle collision. Angle collision is also known as T-bone collision, and this is when the front of a vehicle hits the side of another vehicle. I think that's pretty common with bicycle incidents. The next is rear end. Then we have the side swipe. Side swipe is when two cyclists brush each other, leading to some kind of collision. They continue that way with head-on collision, hitting pedestrians, backing, and then again side swipe in the opposite direction. Again, I was also interested in the primary locations. Where are these occurring? So at the bottom with the pie chart, I mentioned the stop control location again. But if we look at the next slide, which talks about the location type and the collision that is occurring at those places, we can make or draw some inferences over here that all the angle collisions are happening somewhere on driveways and underpasses, and I'll say 100% of these incidents are happening at ramps. And for bridges, it's usually a rear end collision, which is interesting. And I'm sure it's because most cyclists stop at bridges, and then when they want to back up, it results into some kind of collision out there. So again, looking at the location type specifically, we have our driveway or parking lot being the first, followed by underpass, ramp, and then the bridge. And these occur mostly during the day. Bridge incidents, I have over here that it only occurs during the night, which I find to be interesting. Now, I also wanted to look at the trend of incidents during the year. So we'll start with our top right. Most of the incidents are occurring September, August, October, May, July. And that tells us right off the bat that is between summer and fall. Those are from summer to fall, those are the times where we have the most bicycle incidents. And obviously, those are the warmest time of the year. The weather is wonderful. The trees look beautiful, especially during the fall, which is September, and people want to go out there and see what's happening on the landscape. And by week, we can also see that most of these incidents start occurring, or they occur most during the midweek, and then it kind of follows on weekends. And for some reason, males tend to suffer more injuries on weekends than females, but I thought that was interesting. That it continues that way, with Sunday being the least occurring day for incidents. Again, by illumination, when it's daylight, that's where we get most incidents, telling us that most people prefer riding bicycles during the day, and a few other incidents are caused at night. And those nights are when there are street lights compared to when there's no lighting. So by the hour of the day, we see that the incidents peak the most, or we have the most incidents recorded around 16 o'clock, which is also 4 p.m., and also around 21 o'clock, and that's also 9 o'clock p.m. So that was interesting. Afternoons and evenings. Now, my favorite part, which was the main reason why I took on this project, is the clothing and gear. What's going on with the cyclists and what they're wearing, and what are some of the protection gears out there. So starting with the top right corner over here, I saw an attribute for airbag, which I found interesting. Apparently, some pedal cycles have some airbags attached, which would deploy when there's an impact. However, I mean, just by looking at the distribution of male and females over here, the males which participate more, I mean, across the genders, basically, nobody is actually wearing any major safety device. A few people would wear an elbow, knee, or other pad, and also a motorcycle eye protection. Again, the airbag, I mean, the airbag pad was not deployed in majority of these incidents, and some of them are even undefined. And across board, most people were not wearing helmets compared to those who wore helmets. So that explains a lot. So if we look at the seriousness of the injury compared to the safety devices that people had on, we can tell, I mean, it's unknown whether the airbag was deployed, but this is the part I found interesting. The bicyclist wearing an elbow, knee, or other pads, at least a number of cyclists are wearing these things, and a few of them also wore eye protection for one reason or the other. So yeah, again, some bicycles also are required to have a rear reflector, and we're seeing that those that did not have rear reflector actually resulted in death incidents over here. So I thought that was interesting to note. So with all of this that we've gathered so far, if I'm a cyclist and I get into an accident, what are the laws out there? Even prior to getting into an accident, what should I be knowing about cycling? So I came across the Pennsylvania Vehicle Code, and Chapter 35 specifically talks about the bike laws that protect the cycling community. So I attached a link to this presentation, and you can take a closer look. It's also in my report as well as a source. You can take a closer look at what's happening here with the statutes and codes for cycling. But then again, I was wondering what's in those statutes and laws or codes. So I generated a few FAQs here. In my report, there were about 10 FAQs, but for this presentation, I reduced it to about 5. So what traffic laws apply to cyclists in Pennsylvania? And found that in Pennsylvania, the bicycles are legally recognized as vehicles, so they have all the rights and responsibilities as any other motor vehicle, and so they also have to adhere to all traffic laws, signs, and signals, including stopping at stop signs. So I also asked, do I have to wear a helmet? Is it required by law? Apparently, there's no statewide mandatory helmet law for cyclists, especially in Pennsylvania. However, children under the age of 12 are required to wear a helmet, whether they are the cyclist or a passenger. The third question I had, are there any specific lighting requirements for bicycles to be considered road-worthy or, sidewalk worthy or bike lane worthy? So yes, there are a few requirements. So first, there should be a front white light visible for about 500 feet and a red rear reflector rear red reflector, which is visible from about the same distance. And then the bikes should have effective brakes. Some municipalities and counties also require other safety devices, such as a bell, to help with that. I asked, can I ride my bike across a sidewalk? And the answer is no. A cyclist must dismount and walk their bikes across the sidewalk because just like cars, bicycles are not entitled to priority over other vehicles. I thought that was very, very interesting. And then the last one for this presentation, can I access the freeway to reach my destination on a bike? So the answer is yes, bicycle can be ridden on Pennsylvania freeways with the permission from the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation. However, these access are granted typically for events such as bike races. It's quite rare to see individual bikers on freeways. Okay, so my next area of focus, in the event of an accident, am I entitled to any insurance claims? What do I do? What are some of the compensation? And I saw two areas. So first, yes, your auto policy should cover any bicycle-related incident, whether you are the one at fault as a vehicle driver or a cyclist. So, I mean, I think it's quite optional for some insurance companies, but if you are an ardent cyclist, you would want to make sure that your auto policy does cover cycling. The other category is, what if the accident is caused by bad road conditions or lighting issues? You could also file a claim or sue the city or the municipality for that incident. And I thought that was interesting. So I offered a few recommendations to also help with safe cycling. The first is to prioritize safety and awareness on roadways. 2 is to familiarize yourself with bike laws. 3, which I think is very important, is to stay visible and predictable. There are some hand gestures and things you can do as a cyclist to let other motorists know what your intentions are and to exercise caution on roadways. And number 4, when an accident happens, yes, don't hesitate. Go ahead and file a claim. It's just like any other roadside motor accidents. And with that, I realized, navigating a bike incident claim can be quite tricky. So I offered a suggestion here as my final recommendation, which is to get an attorney. Yeah, so from my research, I did find this law firm that delves into accident cases, and they're very good with motorcycles and bicycles. I think it will be a good resource to have as your first point of contact if you want to file a bicycle claim. So yeah, basically that brings me to the end of my presentation on cycling in Philadelphia County specifically. I hope you learned a lot, at least from the demographics, the main causes, the primary locations, and the trend analysis. I was wondering if you had any questions specifically in mind. I'll be happy if you could direct them to me via email. And so thank you so much for your time and attention. The paper that I wrote, which is quite extensive, it has a lot more detail with the analysis and recommendations. That paper will be available along with the Power BI report and the literature references. They will all be available upon request. Again, thank you so much for coming to the end of this presentation.